Adoption, yes.
Maybe short. That Wi-Fi maybe short.
Oh. Can't remember the password. Do you want to be vice chair?
Okay, commissioners, we're live on YouTube and recording Zoom, so we can get started whenever you're ready.
Whatever.
So Kenny and Heather are coming.
Kenny's not gonna be here. I don't know. I haven't heard from Heather. Haven't heard anything from Heather.
It's our bell time, so. Yeah, he's looking at it. Okay, ready to go. I'm live, so.
We ready?
Yep, whenever you guys are.
Those lights are blinding us.
Okay. All right, we'll begin. Welcome to Planning Commission meeting, April 13th, 2022. No, 2023. I'm a year behind. Okay. Okay, we will have our pledge by Teresa will lead us in the pledge and Heron will offer us a prayer. Begin with me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, as we begin this planning meeting, we are grateful for the opportunity of serving in the capacity that we might be able to help the citizens of this city and to help the city work more coordinatedly and we might have a better functioning cooperation among the citizens. We're grateful for this land in which we live, for the freedoms and liberties which we enjoy. We pray that we will stand for right and for good. And pray that thy spirit will be with us to guide us this night. We may choose wisely and make proper decisions. We ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Teresa and Heron. I know Kenny was asked to be excused tonight. I haven't heard anything from Heather. Did you?
Haven't either, no.
Okay, well, we'll move along. We need to approve the minutes, so I need a motion. I mean the agenda. I was looking at the agenda right there. We'll do the agenda first, but I need a motion to approve.
I so
Somebody?
move that we approve the agenda of last week.
And a second. Can I second?
Second.
Okay, good. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda for this meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Now we'll move on to the minutes. We have the minutes of January 19th, 2023 and February 16th, 2023. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to read those. Okay, then we'll move along. We need a motion to approve the minutes. Can we just do them both at the same time or just one at a time? Okay, well, I need a motion to approve the minutes of January 19th and February 16th, 2023, the Planning Commission.
I so move that we approve those minutes.
And I'll second it if I can. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Go. All right, moving right along. We have Gavin here. Can we have him tell us a little bit about yourself, Gavin, please?
We can, but you didn't ask if anyone said no to the minute.
Oh, does anybody say no? No, okay.
I just wanted to
Thank
make
you.
sure.
Thank you. Moving right along. Gavin is our new commission member and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. The quick story is my wife and I met at school here many years ago, and We got married and graduated and went to go live in Colorado for about 18 years. And while I was in Colorado, I had an opportunity to be on our city council there. So I have a little bit of background in city stuff, municipal stuff, and land use. And so then about 5 years ago, moved here to North Logan and was under the radar until Buzzy Mullikel found me and said, "Hey, would you like to join the Planning Commission?" And so said yes. But my wife and I, we've been here 5 years. We've got 3 daughters, and I work at Space Dynamics Lab and love to cook and millions of other interests. So,
Well, great. Welcome. We're glad to have you.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So Gavin has finished his first hour of training as required by Utah state law to participate in our meetings today. So we appreciate him jumping in and getting that done quickly, as well as his Open and Public Meetings Act training. So that's great.
Awesome.
So he's eligible to participate in today's meeting. And he'll be filling in Commissioner Coleman's term. So technically Commissioner Payne will end his term in February of 26. So just FYI on where that sits.
All right. Sounds good. Welcome. Thank you. Moving right along, we are supposed to have an election of a vice chair. Since we don't have people here, can we still do that or what?
We can wait.
Okay.
As long as we are okay, as long as we have the chairperson here today, we can proceed. But
Okay.
yeah, we're short of a couple members. So
Well, let's wait until next time then.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to item number 2, public hearing and potential recommendation regarding zoning text amendment to North Logan City Land Use Code and Design Standards Manual. Scott, do you want to tell us about that to begin with?
yes, okay. Thanks, commissioners. This particular agenda item we've looked at in work session the past couple of meetings, and what you have before you is just a more formalized staff report. And the red line text in the exhibit has not been changed. There's no changes since the last time we've seen it. I'm happy to give an overview. I know Commissioner Payne has had a chance to read through it, but is there any clarifications that anybody would like? I can give a brief synopsis for those in the public and those who may not recall. It's been a minute since we've looked at this. But any initial questions before I pull up some maps and we can kind of chat about it?
No.
Okay, so this is on our agenda as a public hearing. We've had work sessions to kind of work through this and create it. The next step is to hear from the public, see if they have any comments. And then we will pass a recommendation to the city council if you're comfortable. But as we're looking at our city, a while back, we had some legislation go through called the Wildercrest Rule, and it was a rule in our subdivision ordinance that was crafted to try to prevent long appendages of development without secondary egress. There's a little bit of a safety concern stemming from the slow creep of our development on the bench, ending in Wildercrest over here, where the closest point for these folks to egress from their subdivision is all the way back to 16th East through Foothill Drive, and it's a bit of a trek. It's several thousand feet, and it's quite a bit longer than is comfortable. So we put into place the Wildercrest Rule. This mouse is very sensitive, sorry. Which basically stated that you cannot develop anything beyond 750 feet without a secondary point of egress. And we looked at that as kind of a temporary solution to ensure we don't get down too far of dead end roads without having secondary egress. But we knew that we needed to come back and add more to it, have a little bit more thought, so we could allow for extension of roads in a predictable, methodical way. So what we looked at as an example, this mouse is just crazy. I'm sorry. There we go. This particular subdivision came in not too long ago. This is the Orchard View Estates subdivision, and it's on a terminal, dead end road. And this is about as far as development can occur under the Wildercrest Rule with that 750-foot requirement, which means that this particular road, even though it's a master planned road, cannot connect into another master plan street without a pretty significantly sized development that would allow all those streets to connect back into our street network. So what we looked at, and I had the privilege of working in Weber County, who also went through this exercise and scratched their heads on this dilemma. So we didn't have to be the only ones to create the wheel again. But we worked with the fire marshal in the unincorporated areas of Weber County and looked at the fire code for safety, for egress, adequate emergency vehicle access, and tried to find a way to allow for development to continue beyond 750 feet, but in a predictable way along a master plan street route and with safety in mind. So basically what it entails is you can go beyond 750 feet, but you cannot exceed 30 homes unless you have a secondary point of egress, or you fire sprinkle the homes beyond that limitation. So if, for example, there's inadequate access in a snowstorm and someone's got a fire, at least you have a sprinkler system to try to put it out, right? So what we've crafted is a separation between what we're calling permanently terminal streets and temporarily terminal streets. A permanently terminal street is basically a cul-de-sac. You know, it's not planned to go anywhere. It's landlocked, or there may be topography or natural features that prevent it from going anywhere. And so those types of streets are capped at 750 as a rule. Now, there's some language that allows for a little bit of discretion with our city council, but as a rule of thumb, 750 is the cap. But if it's temporarily terminal, such as this Foothill Drive, we would say, okay, it's temporarily terminal. It's along a master plan street route. We know we want it to continue, and we know where we want it to go and where we want it to connect to. How do we allow that to continue in a safe and predictable manner? And so we have language in this text amendment that allows for it to extend beyond 750 feet, up to 30 lots, before a secondary point of egress would have to be made, or fire sprinkle suppression would have to be added. And that would allow for, you know, these multiple property owners, where it's fractionally owned, it's not a single owner that owns all this land, for example, to pull this road along that anticipated street route, develop a few more homes up to that, 30 without any additional requirements. But once they hit 30, they can continue building if they fire sprinkle those few homes. But it helps them kind of close the gap across no man's land, so we can make some interior connections on these mega blocks, so to speak. In this particular area, 2700 will be our master plan street on the street plan, and that will dip down to a 2600 and connect over here into 2050. That's the planned east-west connection through this mega block. And we want to see if we can get this additionally master planned road to connect and create an intersection where it's anticipated and tie back in. Oh, I'm sorry. I forget that this mouse doesn't work. Okay, see Foothill Drive, right top center of your screen. And the crosshatch with 2900 North. Okay, so that's an existing subdivision, and the dead end is right at the tip of that green parcel.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Is it in just the settings? Sorry, say that louder. Will this work? There we go. Success.
There you go.
That's nice.
It's as big as it gets.
Good arrow.
I can see that one.
That's a good arrow there.
We're gonna be
Scott.
dramatic. How about? Okay, no, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Let's make sure everyone's on the same page. Okay, so this Foothill Drive is planned to extend and kind of curve with how the canal curves. And it's intended to marry up with this 2700 North, which will actually curve into a 2600 North and tie in at this 2050 East. 26. Oh, that's right. I forgot. Thank you. Yeah, so this will connect here, right there. I was thinking 25 is what dips up to 26.
No,
There you
where's
go.
the cemetery?
The
Cemetery's right
cemetery's
here.
farther.
Where's the cemetery?
It's right there, Aaron.
Right here.
Okay. And I know that 2500 North does not go on up
It does
past the
not.
cemetery.
26 someday is supposed to go.
From an aerial imagery, this looks like a street, but it's substandard. It's a public lane that provides access only to the cemetery. It's not intended for vehicular traffic to connect through up to Wildercrest. That's where this 25 curves up to 26 and 26 carries through to this point. So here's your east-west, and then here's your north-south. This is no man's land. And right now there's just no way for an individual property owner to extend beyond 750 feet under our current language to make this no man's land connected and allow for, anticipated development here. So that's kind of the crux of the connectivity portion. We've added some language to allow for a private street option if it makes sense and the city council wants to grant that permission. A private lane dead end, maybe we allow for those homeowners to keep that private, personally maintain it, and keep it off of the city's requirements to maintain in perpetuity. Let me hop in here, just make sure I'm not forgetting anything. We've added a couple of definitions to the definition section. Some basic language for expectations that subdivisions tie into undeveloped land adjacent to them in a logical manner to facilitate future development to adjacent properties that are either undeveloped or underdeveloped. Public-private streets. Terminal streets, permanently terminal versus temporarily terminals. We touched that. We've added some language with regards to block length. So the maximum block length is 1320. It's traditional block length here with a minimum of 275. So at least 2 tiers of lots on the minimum block length. We have added some language that blocks over 660 feet are required to have a public pedestrian pathway through the mid-block section to facilitate pedestrian connectivity. A little bit of language with regards to half streets. Basically, we already allowed for half streets through our design standard technical manual, but we've kind of honed in on that. And then lastly, we added some language into the subdivision ordinance for an incentive. We're calling it a connectivity incentivized subdivision or subdivision connectivity incentive. That's what we said. This is on page 26 of your staff report if you want to follow along.
Okay.
So we're saying for subdivision methods 1 and 2, so standard subdivisions and density determinant subdivisions, developers are required to provide access to all of the lots that they create with frontage along a publicly dedicated road or a private street if they're permitted a private street. But oftentimes, they're able to kind of work with a puzzle piece that they've got to work with, and they'll try to figure it out, a road network that provides access to all the lots in the most efficient way possible, right? How do we maximize the developability of each parcel? Oftentimes that means that they provide a street in a way that satisfies their requirements and technically satisfies the requirements to provide access to all their lots, but it doesn't necessarily take into consideration some external factors, such as their neighboring subdivisions, subdivisions adjacent or future development that has not yet occurred. And we want to work with the developer to incentivize them to make the more preferential connectivity. But we don't necessarily want to make it to where they are tipping or we're tipping into a disproportionate exaction where we're asking too much of a developer. We can only ask for so much. We can only ask them to provide improvements for their actual impact. And if we go beyond that, then it's technically what we call a disproportionate exaction. And it's government overreach at that point. So instead of overreaching, we'll come to the table with a developer and we'll say, we'll grant you an incentive if you grant the city, preferred connectivity or superior connectivity. And we'll allow you to calculate your density without removing your road rights of way. So it gives them a little bit of that land back to their base density calculation that they would have lost by providing that additional connectivity. We'll give that back to them. So we basically say, we'll give you a few more lots that you otherwise would have lost by complying with this, preferred connectivity. If you go ahead and do that for us. So it's kind of a win-win. The city gets what they want and need to have the best, public outcome. We're not overreaching with a disproportionate exaction, and the developer also walks away without being materially hurt, I guess you could say. So that's the crux of this subdivision connectivity incentive. Now, they're not eligible to kind of wiggle their way out of any existing requirements. So if there's like a master plan street that's planned in their area, an anticipated trail that needs to go through. Those are items that they have to provide regardless, and that we don't have to incentivize those. Those aren't issues for exactions. They're part of master plan documents. They purchase the property knowing that they're going to have to provide those through their development. So we're not giving those up for free. They still have to provide those. So they really do have to go above and beyond in what they're proposing for connectivity to be granted this incentive. And it's not granted by right. It is something they have to request from the city council. And if the city council and the planning commission believe that they have crossed the bar to receive that incentive. So that's the crux of that second part, that connectivity incentive. Okay, that's the proposal in a nutshell. Do you guys have any questions about the details in the red lines or anything you'd like to clarify?
No, I appreciate you getting this sent out to us in a timely manner too. That
Sure.
was good. Anybody have questions? Gavin?
I've got two questions. So if I put myself in the shoe of a developer, and about where your arrow is there, say I owned that property. Today, I couldn't develop that if I was going to take that connection through.
Further south,
Yeah, so today I couldn't develop,
correct.
but with this change, I could develop just that property as long as the homes have the sprinkling system.
So yes and no. So from this point where you connect back into the broader network, Canyon Ridge Drive, this is already extended to about 780 feet. So they've kind of maximized the existing language, 750. What we're saying under this new language is we'll allow you to go beyond that 750, but you cannot exceed 30 homes. If you do exceed 30 homes along that street route that is still terminal, then you have to sprinkler them.
Right.
Until you make that secondary connection into the roadway. So you can go well beyond 750. You can't go beyond 30 unless you sprinkle.
Or a neighboring developer makes the connection and connects to you.
Right.
Then building permits pulled after that point wouldn't need it.
Correct. Yeah. So we've made the connection. We're no longer terminal.
Right.
Folks can get out on at least two separate pathways.
Okay. Well, can I ask a question?
We will have a public hearing. Yeah. Whenever the commission is ready to open the hearing.
Any more questions from commissioners? Gavin?
One more. And so with the incentive, I'm just trying to think of a situation. So if I had this, again, taking the same lot, an example, if I own that property and I wanted to put a house, say, directly south of that entrance, and so I wanted to move, say, an interior road to, say, swing to the east and then come down, and it didn't match what may be planned.
The planned street route.
Yeah, does that, I mean, could I do that? And this incentive would incentivize me to say, no, please connect here and you get the extra density.
Yes and no. The language, if you read it carefully, it does allow for minor deviations from the planned street route based on, maybe a unique topographical constraint or what have you. So it allows for you to differ from the preferred street routing. This isn't part of the incentive. This is just part of allowing you to go beyond 750 along that planned street route, right? We allow you to vary by up to 400 feet as long as we can get it back to where it needs to go. And it's meant to allow for unique configuration in the land that may make it more difficult to follow the exact line on the plan. But for example, if so, this is a planned street connection through here. This is a planned street route. And let's say that you want to, subdivide this off as a single home and it's along that planned street route. You could, let's say, dip it down slightly. Let's say you take this entire lot. Let's just say you're breaking this off as a single lot. You could, maybe there's something in the way here. You could kind of meander it as long as it meets the radius requirements for engineering and what have you, but it does have to tie back closely to where that planned street route would continue on through. Did that answer your question?
And so that's the condition today.
That's
the
if
new-
this language is adopted.
The new
Okay.
condition.
So today you have to follow the master plan.
Yes, you do have to follow the master plan, but today you couldn't break this off and create a lot because it's beyond the 750.
Okay, so the incentive So the incentive is to offer to the developer to better connect. If it's already planned, I'm trying to figure out what the incentive, what case would.
Let
an
me show
incentive
you.
be?
We had an example where this is actually employed in practice.
Yeah, thank you.
This actually was a project that came through that prompted us to create this language and make this a standard tool in our subdivision ordinance, because it was a unique situation where we thought it was a win-win, but we didn't really have the tool available at the time to make it come to fruition. So this is in the Ogden Valley, north of Liberty, that's right around Liberty, north of Eden. And we had a property owner right here. They own 9 acres, which was this piece here, exactly 9 acres. Okay. And they have 3 acre zoning in this area. So they had to have exactly 3 acres in each lot, and they had exactly 9 acres, which if they dedicated road right of way along this area, they would have been substandard. They would have only gotten 2 lots out of this 9 acres instead of 3. This actually was not a master plan street, but we knew that there was a lot of undeveloped land in the middle of this block. And we felt like this was a good mid-block connection to allow this street to come in. It wasn't part of the master transportation plan at the time. And so we looked at this and we said, well, if we ask him to dedicate right of way, he's not going to be able to get the lots out of the property that he possibly could. We had a tool that allowed for them to use what was called basically a private lane alternative access is what we called it. And it was basically saying this is a shared driveway that they could pull through here and create 3 lots. They wouldn't have to dedicate anything, still get their 3 lots out of it if they use that shared drive tool. We said, look, we don't really want this to be a shared drive. We want this to be a future street. Even though our transportation master plan doesn't anticipate it, we thought it was actually something that should have been on the plan, but wasn't. And so we said, look, how about this? How about you guys go ahead and subdivide 3 lots, and we'll have you deed over this after the fact instead of having it as a dedication on the subdivision, an exaction. So they went ahead and they, instead of having to deduct this from their density calculation, we said, go ahead and subdivide these into 3. We'll have you we'll have you deed this over as public right of way after the fact. And we'll go ahead and legitimize the subdivision, allowing these lots to be slightly substandard than 3 acres, because we feel like it's a beneficial use to get this for the county. So that's kind of a backwards way of doing it, is kind of, hey, we'll work together and figure this out, even though it's technically not something in the ordinance today, but we think that this is a great win-win for everybody. So we created this ordinance that basically said, look, we want this as right of way. It's above what they technically had to do because it wasn't part of our transportation master plan. And they would not have been able to do it if we didn't kind of backwards engineer this thing. The way that the language reads now is it allows this to happen all through the platting process, the subdivision, where they can go ahead and dedicate in the plat this right of way and allow for these lots to be slightly substandard than the zoning minimum. So city, county gets what they want, developer gets what they want. We all walk away happy.
Wait, so could I follow up that? So the incentive really will more likely occur to take a half road or I'll say a substandard road to a full road more often than a routing choice within a property.
Yeah, it's more like, hey, there's a way to connect into this adjacent property that we think is beneficial to not only you, but your neighbor as well, that they technically don't need in order to provide access to the lots that they're creating. And so it's kind of a waste of land for them to do that just at the city's request. And so we're saying, hey, we'll give you all the road right of way, all that area in the road right of way if you make this connection, so you don't lose out on a lot that would otherwise be calculated if we don't have to take that area out of the right of way. It kind of just gives it back. They give us connectivity, we give them the density back that they would lose otherwise.
Yeah.
So some flexibility is what it kind of builds in.
Hey, any more questions? And of course, this all depends on what the commission sends on to the city council
Right.
with their approval.
Nobody's entitled to this incentive. It's one of those things we'll look on it on a case by case basis and see if they've met the bar or not. if they've provided that, that superior connectivity and gone above and beyond what they otherwise would have already had to have given through, their development request.
Hey. All right, move on. Welcome, Heather. Sorry. Okay, we'll move on to our public hearing. Before you begin, please state your name for the record. Please speak into the microphone so that your comments can be recorded. Please limit your statements to 2 minutes. Get my phone. If you're also speaking on behalf of others, you may ask the chairman for more time. Please phrase your opinions in the form of statements, not questions. A public hearing is your opportunity to express your opinions to the Planning Commission. It is not a time to ask questions and expect dialogue between yourself and the commission or city staff. Please address your comments to the commission, not to the public. The commission might ask questions about your comments in order for them to better understand you. If you have questions or need to discuss an issue, please meet with the Planning Commission members or the appropriate city staff member before the public hearing where dialogue can take place. You may provide a written statement as your input for a hearing. You may read your entire statement or summarize it. The 2-minute limit applies. You may provide a copy of a written statement to the city recorder. He will make copies for the commission. Written comments, if a copy is provided, become a part of the public record, but are not included in the minutes of the meeting. All right, so we'll open our public hearing. Any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts? Can you ask it as a statement? No? Okay.
Is your question a concern that you could raise in a statement format? Yeah, we can chat after if you'd like.
Okay. Anyone else?
Let's hurry this on.
All right, we will close our public hearing and move on to the commission to make a recommendation. We've talked about this. Kevin, you kind of missed the previous discussions we've had on all of this before. But I think Scott's got us up to date here. Are we ready to go on and make a recommendation to the city or not? Any other? Okay. Heron,
Let's go forward. Go ahead.
you ready to make a motion?
Sure. Madam Chairman, I move that we have a positive recommendation for this, the city council.
Okay, it's been moved that we make a positive recommendation to the city council. Do we have a second? A second. It's been moved and seconded that we make a positive recommendation on this regarding, do I need to go through all this? Okay,
You can just say the file number if you want. So it's
okay, regarding
2023-02.
regarding ZTA 2023-02. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We'll send that on to the city council with a positive recommendation. Thank you. Let's move on to item number 2. Scott, do you want to take us through this one?
Yep. So what we have next on the agenda is a concept plan review and potential recommendation for a subdivision by the name of Linden Lane, located approximately 3100 north and 12th east, 5.5 acres in the R120 zone. I'll pull it up here. We do have the developer, Nick Porter, here with us. If he has any comments or if we have any questions or clarifications, he's able to answer those for us. If we go to the location here, this subdivision is a little bit unique in that the parcel is actually bisected by 3100 north that went through a couple of years back. And this entire piece, as it straddles this road, is 5.5 acres. And what we see here in this black line shows the municipal boundary. So we're technically all in North Logan City. However, the city does have an agreement with Hyde Park. It's a boundary line, annexation line agreement that kind of dictates where and in which parts of this area would be part of each city. And 3100 North was that differentiating line. where that north portion is anticipated to go over to Hyde Park City and the south portion will stay in North Logan. Let me pull up the zoning here. Okay, there we go. So R120, so they're allowed to have lots 20,000 square feet if they do a standard subdivision, but this particular request is what we call density determinant. It's kind of like a lot averaging where some are allowed to be a little bit smaller, some a little bit bigger, as long as the underlying density doesn't exceed the base. So I'm going to pull up the staff report. Just kind of chat through this here real quick. Blow this up. This is in your packet as well if you want to follow along on paper form, but jump down. We talked about this kind of being in an area that's governed by this annexation limit and cost sharing agreement. That's one of the exhibits. Actually, no, this one isn't. The other agreement is Exhibit A. We'll get into here in a minute, but this cost sharing agreement is a historical document. Alan, do you know when that document was agreed to, signed? Dates back quite a ways, doesn't it? The boundary agreement with Hyde Park, the annexation agreement. It's a historical document. It's been longstanding. So let's see. Okay, so when we knew that this agreement was applicable, whenever this land that was kind of in this area is proposed for development, we pull it out, dust it off, take a look. So we did that. We chatted with Hyde Park as well as ourselves with the developer to look into how would this land develop pursuant to that boundary annexation agreement with Hyde Park. And what came out of those discussions was an agreement, a pre-development agreement between the cities and the developer on how to go ahead and develop this property while still keeping that annexation agreement in mind and staying with those requirements. So that's what Exhibit A led to in your agreement. It's a pre-development agreement with developer Nick Porter and both of the cities as we look to develop this property. Let's look through. I'll pull open the actual concept plan here so we can just look at it. Yeah, Exhibit B. Okay, so here's the general layout of the subdivision. Now 3100 North has already gone through, but the subdivision plat will formally dedicate this area as public right of way. So this area here will be dedicated, and also some frontage on 12th East will be dedicated. 3100 North is actually an 80-foot wide, called out as an 80-foot wide minor arterial in our transportation master plan. And then 12th East is a 66-foot wide right of way. So the plan will be to grant a little bit of right of way on the frontage with 12th, and then all of the area encumbered by 3100 North in a width of 80 feet. So that will be taken care of through the platting process. And then the remaining lots are varying in size from a half acre, actually a little bit less than a half acre. These about a third of an acre, 0.34 at 15,000 square feet on the small side, up to this 1.4 acre larger estate parcel above. But what we're looking at in our subdivision ordinance is the density determinant language allows for slightly smaller, 15,000 being the smallest square footage that is permitted, and a width of 80 feet on the width. So each of the lots meet at least the minimum or are greater than the minimum. So the lots are compliant in that regard. A couple of things to look at as we go through. Water for the subdivision. There's existing culinary water infrastructure in the vicinity that they'll be tying into through 3100 and 12th East. Same story with secondary water. There's existing infrastructure to tie into. So it's mostly just kind of pulling laterals at this point. Sewer, same story. The infrastructure is existing, so they'll just be connecting to what is there. They will be required to put in some streetlights. And as far as I'm kind of going through the ordinance here, kind of check box, but And one of the things we're supposed to look at this stage in concept is how sanitation will be delivered and or managed. There's really not a concern here since all the lots front on a publicly standard road. We don't have any narrow lanes or hammerheads or turnaround concerns here. One of the things that we're supposed to do when we look at a concept plan is to determine which additional studies or reports are required of a developer before it goes forward for preliminary plat and development plan. And as we've looked at the list of reports towards the bottom of your second page on the staff report, is a soils report has been requested to be waived. In this area, it's fairly flat. We don't anticipate many issues with soils. A geology report is requested to be waived. Again, we're in flat land, not many concerns with geology. Grading and drainage, we will want to look at grading and drainage as part of their development plan, so we'll ask that that be put together. Water conservation plan as well, we'll ask that that be put together. A non-buildable area and or common space vegetation plan. This is requested to be waived because there is no open space, no common area, no anticipated HOA in regards of maintenance of common open spaces. Additionally, it's fairly flat ground, not concerned with steep slopes, water features, other sensitive lands. So we'll say that is not necessary. Traffic report, again, not necessarily needed here. It's not a commercial development. You know, the existing public street should be adequate to handle the traffic. Fire protection plan, they're not in the WUI area, the wild urban, I forget what that's called, wild urban interface, basically in the foothills where you might catch your house on fire with a wildfire. So not much of a concern from a fire protection plan. So we'll say that can be waived. We will want to see a street lighting plan. All new subdivisions require street lights, so we'll ask them to submit what that looks like as part of their development plan, which will be the next step that they go through. Development method, we've chatted about this. It'll be density determinant, so it's our second available method in the subdivision ordinance. No planned phasing, so this will kind of be a one and done deal. Unless, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, you'll just plat this as a single plat, right? Okay. So if that's the case, then what we would do is we would allow for this to go forward as a preliminary plat, and then they would just separate two final plats and record them separately. Okay. But as of now, it could go forward just as a single, but they would need to take care of a final plat for either if they were to split it into two phases. Okay. No open space that we need to worry about, planned ownership and maintenance. And the subdivision recording method will be a traditional subdivision plat. So no meets and bounds descriptions. This is just a standard subdivision where we're dedicating right of way. We do have a minor subdivision allowance in our code where if they have fewer than 9 lots, they can use meets and bounds. But if they're dedicating any right of way, the best way to do it is just through a standard subdivision plat. So that'll be the method that they record this going forward. And then anticipated method for ensuring completion of the subdivision's infrastructure is typically done through an escrow agreement where they or an escrow account where they deposit 110% of the estimated improvement costs. So they can go ahead and record the plat, sell the lots. And then we would give that back to them once they've completed. We'd hold back a warranty bond of 10%, you know, for a year until we can verify that the improvements have gone through that warranty phase. Okay. Jumping into the general plan analysis or general plan in this area, this is an area called the Community-Agricultural District and Development Area. It's basically kind of the middle area of our community. It's not on the bench. It's just right below what we consider the bench areas, but it's also not down the valley floor in our commercial and industrial areas. So it's kind of just the standard area, not as many development constraints like topography and sensitive lands. So in this area, it basically wants us through the general plan. It wants us to look at opportunities to cluster lots, setting aside open space. Whenever possible, if we can cluster and set aside open space, that's obviously preferred. But when you're only dealing with 5.5 acres, clustering together and creating maybe 1.5 acres of open space isn't really preferential, because what do you do with 1.5 acres? These little pocket parks are hard for our parks department to maintain, and there's no HOA to maintain that small amount of open space. So this will just be a density determinant type of a subdivision. The transportation element of the general plan is being satisfied here with 3100 north going through and 12th east. There's no new roadways that need to be created beyond what's already there. Parks and trails. This entire subdivision does have frontage on the canal there. And so they do need to grant a 15-foot access and recreation type of an easement, basically a public trail. You can kind of see that with the dashed line there on the left-hand side, on the west side of the subdivision where that would be granted to make those connections. So that's satisfied. And then there's no planned parks within this area on our parks master plan. When we're looking at a concept plan, we're just kind of looking at it from a broad perspective. How does it integrate with the adjacent property? Anything unique about it that we need to consider? I view this as a pretty standard run-of-the-mill type of a subdivision. The biggest thing that I'm wanting to make sure we don't forget about is the trail. And it's already shown there on the concept plan along the canal. So
Scott, I'm sorry, I missed. What's the deal with Hyde Park? And does that involve the northernmost lot or is it on the other side of the canal?
yeah, so all of this northern part will be annexed into Hyde Park after it's finished being subdivided. So
Okay,
the way the agreement reads is the developer will be entitled and go through the development process within North Logan City. And once they record the plat, then they'll work with Hyde Park and North Logan to de-annex that northern portion. North Logan has agreed not to protest that de-annexation, and then they'll request to be annexed into Hyde Park. And they cannot pull any building permits until that annexation process is complete.
okay.
Scott, on the egress and ingress on these lots, where are we looking at that? There's those three together, two on the east, one on the west.
These
What's
right here.
yeah, right there. What's the ingress and egress on those three?
So that's one thing that we'll look at when we get into the development plan, but we've kind of already anticipated where we want driveways to be. At the concept level, we could put in a condition at this point, but it is on our radar that this lot, for example, we would request that the driveway be as far away from the intersection as possible. So kind of on this western portion. And then we would ask that these lots share a single point of access right in the middle. So it'd be like a cross access easement right here. And then the same right here for these two lots. So we're trying to reduce the number of curb cuts onto 12th East and 3100. This particular lot would have its own, and then these two would share cross access easement right here in the middle. So we're trying to reduce the number of points of conflict on the street. So that'll be something that we'll review as part of the preliminary plat. We'll make sure those easements are shown. So we can predict when we are pulling building permits, and we can review each individual home where their driveway is proposed and make sure they're going in
Okay.
with that in mind. Okay. Any other questions? So kind of looking at this from a higher level with concept. So we're not getting too far into the weeds, but we'll definitely get into that with the next phase of review.
I've got a question, and this isn't intended to affect this particular application, but if from the general plan analysis and the future land use, it talks about this space being planned to be more of a clustered lots, more of an open space, preserving the agricultural feel of the town. And I understand why there isn't much being done here because it's a 5-acre property. But if I look at all the property owners in the area, most of them are about 5-acre spots. And so
Yeah.
if the same is said of each of those, then what is there to do? How do we preserve the agricultural feel according to the general plan?
Yeah, if you look at the general plan in a bigger context, it basically is looking at this entire area as a broad policy for everything kind of in this area here, this middle area, which they call the community-agricultural district. What it had called out back in 2013 is that we look for opportunities to potentially cluster where we have, the ability to do so. So on some of the larger tracts of land, we would look for those opportunities. It also called out perhaps the city should look into doing, transfer development rights where we could find maybe where this property owner would say, I'd prefer to keep it open. But I've got to monetize what I've got. It's part of my retirement portfolio, what have you. And that type of a tool, we had a little bit of a training on this a little while back, but basically how it works is if this developer wanted to keep this, or if this landowner, before they sold it to a developer, they wanted to keep it open, they could sell or monetize their development rights and transfer them to a location where we did want those rights to go, where we wanted to direct that development. And then we would leave this as a conservation easement. The city hasn't pulled the trigger on that type of a development tool. You know, the general plan said we should look into maybe doing that as a way to protect agricultural and open space throughout this middle section where there might be some opportunities. The city just never did put together a TDR type of an ordinance that would allow that to happen. So when we look at executing the general plan, we're looking at, you know, if there's a larger tract of land that came through as a subdivision, we could maybe look to see, how about you guys cluster into a cluster style and leave some open space for some meaningful open space on a big enough level that it actually is open and not just a little tiny speck. So it's hard to look at the general plan analysis on a small scale like this, but I like to provide that in the staff report, just so you guys are aware that our general plan does try to direct what is happening here, but it's more of a broad policy type of a perspective in a lot of cases. You know, you're right. When you look at these site by site, if we take the same approach, you know, then we won't have any open space at the end of the day, right? Any questions for the developer? Nick, is there anything you'd like to add to this or clarify from what we've presented? Okay.
Any other questions? Heather, do you have a question?
I know, I'm not gonna word this correctly, but when it gets annexed into Hyde Park, will that same trail still be respected at that point?
Yeah, because what will happen is the easement will be recorded with a plat. And that
Okay.
easement it's basically recorded with the county recorder's office, and whether it gets annexed into another city or not, won't change that. The city could, thinking about it, it'll be entitled in North Logan City, and the dedication language will indicate that it's dedicated for public use. I'll have to think about, because the question is who has entitlement to that easement if it's granted to the public. Typically, those easements are either public utility easements or access easements. Well,
I just wonder if that ends up.
no, I'll have to
messing
think
up
about it. I
the
mean, I'm
plan.
not concerned about it. These things, land gets annexed over to, you know, like land in the county that is developed, subdivided in the county, gets annexed into cities all the time. And those easements don't extinguish, but on the plat that says how and what those things are dedicated to, and whose interest they're dedicated to. If it's public, you know, what I'm thinking in the back of my mind is if it goes over to a different land use authority like Hyde Park City, maybe they just hate trail easements for some reason, and their land use authority could perhaps vacate that. There's maybe some law there that I need to look into. I'm not concerned about it. Long story short, but the technicalities behind it, yeah, it's a good
Mhm.
question.
I think that's a good question, because we have some strange easement and trails along the canal as it is in North Logan. So we don't know who can go where, actually.
And unfortunately, we have to piecemeal them together, one development at a time. So when we see these along a canal, we make sure that we follow our ordinance to grab those easements. So eventually we can piece them all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else?
So this is an administrative type of a decision to provide a recommendation to the city council. So there's no need for a public hearing, but you have the discretion to open it up to the public if you think there's something important to hear from the public. So
The public have anything? to say?
I think that the staff recommends a positive recommendation. As long as they take care of the questions required that we've asked to be required. So as for me, I think I could go with a positive recommendation. How about the rest of you?
I feel the same way. Yeah.
Are we ready to
I
do
too.
that then?
Yeah.
All right, we need a motion then.
Gun shy on the motion.
I move that we approve sub 2023-01 and incorporate the staff recommendation with our recommendation.
My paper.
Any motion to make a positive recommendation to the city council? Is that your motion, Gavin?
Yes.
And to incorporate the staff report.
And to incorporate the staff.
Thank you for doing your
With
homework.
the required sections. Do I have a second?
Second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved by Gavin, seconded by Aaron, that we make a positive recommendation to the city council with everything else. Got it, Marie? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you. Let's move on to item number 4. Planning Commission training, best practices regarding the establishment of findings of facts and conclusions of law when acting as the land use authority on administrative land use decisions. Scott?
Yep. Okay, so this is.
May I interrupt Scott for a minute?
Sure.
Marie, can you turn off the ventilation system? It's getting colder in here.
Remember, we just, it's like a freezer in here, so we just learn to live with it.
So on the new city building, let's make sure the heat works, okay?
We need blankets
Heated.
prepared.
We either freeze or we sweat to death.
You want my coat?
It is? Okay.
Okay, Scott, let's move along fast. How's
Yeah,
that?
fast. Here we go.
It's frozen.
Yeah, well, this is an important discussion, so we'll make sure we get in what we need to get in. The reason why it's important is because, as you know, we had a conditional use permit denied through this body, which was then appealed. We have to be careful. We can't discuss that topic in this meeting because in order to preserve the due process rights of that applicant, we cannot discuss or make decisions on that as part of this discussion. But what this is intended to do is to try to give a little bit of training as to what are the best practices and procedures in handling an administrative land use decision so that if it's ever appealed, we don't find ourselves in a position where our appeal authority is saying they don't have enough facts and findings to review that appeal. So this is interesting. There's new case law, literally just a few months old. There's blazing new trails in this area of land use law. And we need to kind of just make sure we're up to speed and understand how should we handle these in the most appropriate manner going forward. But I wanted to give a little bit of context about how our code works and also how city code or state code works in handling an appeal. So you guys may or may not have seen this book, right? I think I'm just going to order everyone one as part of our training budget because I reference it all the time. It's super handy. If you guys have any questions, look.
I have one.
I
Okay.
have one too.
I have one.
I have one.
You have one as well? Aaron?
I've looked at it even. Yeah.
We've
Perfect.
all been reading it.
Great. That's
Gavin needs one. Get him one.
I have one.
Oh, he's got one. Good.
yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is we should really
Maybe,
start.
maybe Kenny needs one. I don't know. He's not here.
It's very concise. So with any topic, you can just look in the glossary or the appendix and just say, okay, what do I want to know about site plans? What do I want to know about conditional use permits? What do I want to know about open and public meetings? Like you literally just think of a topic, find it, and then wherever in the book it is mentioned, it's very straightforward and concise. I mean, it looks like a larger book, but it really is helpful. So I was kind of looking through that manual. I was looking at the case law that recently went through, and I put together this little bit of a summary just to wrap your heads around the law and then the practice that we need to follow so we don't fall in those pitfalls. So in this book, from a quote from the book says, a municipality may, by ordinance, designate whether the appeal authority is to defer to the original decision maker as the factual issues on a land use decision or not. So that's basically from the state code. The state allows us to have an ordinance that designates whether our appeal authority is looking at an original decision and whether or not that original decision is making those factual issues or not on that land use decision. So what I did is I looked at our ordinance and I was looking to see whether or not we designate that topic. So Under state law, 10-9A-707-2, if a local government has not designated a scope of review, the appeal authority is to make the decision de novo or anew. So if our ordinance doesn't say that the review is just a review of the record, then the land use authority, the appeal authority is just supposed to hear it again. If it's appealed, they're supposed to just start over, review a land use decision a second time. But our appeal language in our code, we do have an ordinance that does state, I copy pasted it here. This is out of our land use code. I'm going to pop down here where it says the administrative appeals hearing officer shall on appeal presume that the decision applying the land use ordinance is valid and determine only whether or not the decision is arbitrary, capricious, or illegal, which basically means we have indicated that our appeal authority is not supposed to hear a land use case anew or de novo, but they're just supposed to look at the facts and determine whether or not what our action was, if it was arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. So that means that we need to have a very clear record for them to review if they're not just reviewing everything anew. Okay, so our appeals hearing officer is just looking at the facts and the record. So let's read down here again. Here's another excerpt from the hand manual. Record review. In a record review, the appeal authority may only confirm the original decision if that record includes substantial evidence to support the factual findings. If it does, then the next issue is whether the law was properly applied to the facts. If it was, the original decision is confirmed. In a record review, the decision maker's conclusions are granted deference on the facts. One issue that may arise is whether there is no record or an inadequate record of the original decision. Where the local ordinance calls for a record review and there is no record, the appeal authority should remand the matter back to the original decision maker to establish an appropriate record. We've experienced that firsthand, right? So it goes on and it says, administrative decisions by local boards can only be challenged based on the record made of the decision. So, we did have a challenge, we had an appeal, so we need to look at the record of the decision. If all the information is not in the record, then the decision may not be upheld by the court or an arbitrator. The decision will only survive scrutiny if there is substantial evidence on the record, and information not disclosed cannot be considered as part of the record. So that's from recent case law, as recent as 2017, where that came from. So, and when I was looking at additional case law, if you want to read that from 2017, there's a link here, and there's a very good summary on the Utah Property Rights website. But in a nutshell, that 2017 case out of Moab clarified that meeting the substantial evidence standard requires written findings and conclusions. So we have to have that substantial evidence, and it has to be demonstrated through those written findings and conclusions. In this case, the Utah Supreme Court clarified that it would review the lower court's decision, not the land use authority's decision on appeal from the district court. So basically, as it goes up the ring in the appeals process, the next ring up is only reviewing the next ring down. So for example, we made a decision on a conditional use permit. That permit was denied, went to our appeal authority. The appeal authority basically said, I don't have enough information. They remanded it back to us. However, if the appeal authority had made a decision without sufficient findings of fact and substantial evidence to review, and it had been further appealed up to district court, then the district court would only be looking at our appeal authority to determine whether our appeal authority handled the matter correctly or not. They're not going from district court to review all the way back to the planning commission's process. So that's what this case law in 2017 did. It basically said, we're not going all the way back to the beginning. We're going to just remand it back one. And it literally goes one down until the bottom where it goes one up. However, additional case law, this is the most recent as of February of 23 out of San Juan County. This particular case had several appeals on procedural issues, whether or not they followed proper process. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court on various issues. However, the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals held that the initial planning commission decision to not revoke a conditional use permit was arbitrary and capricious because it made no written findings. And that as the only body authorized to make those findings, this initial fatal flaw rendered subsequent appellate decisions upholding the decisions similarly arbitrary and capricious. It basically says you got to go all the way back to the planning commission, establish those findings, because any decision made after that is arbitrary and capricious without those findings established. So basically what this case law is doing is it's basically putting a lot of that weight on the planning commission and staff to establish those findings clearly and concisely, so that if it is ever appealed, there's enough meat on the bone for, the next rings up in the appeal process to review. So that's recent case law. That's why it's very important for us when we're making administrative decisions, such as the one we just made on the subdivision, that we're clear about our findings of fact. Now, the reason why I wasn't concerned about Commissioner Payne's motion was because he adopted the staff report in his motion. The staff report has written facts and findings and conclusions. Now, where we get into some confusion is perhaps where the planning commission may differ in their opinion from staff and the staff report, which is fine. You guys are totally welcome to have different opinions. You don't have to think the same way that staff does. But if you do, just know that you need to make your facts and your findings very clear as to how they differ from the staff report, because if you're not going to take the staff report and adopt it as part of your motion, then you need to make your own facts and findings very clear on the record, and that those facts and findings get recorded in a written format. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we should go about doing that. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so practically speaking, if I'm reviewing the material ahead of time and I know that I'm going to vote based upon what I've heard or read, right? You've got to hear from the public and other things, but I'm inclined to vote against staff's recommendation.
Mhm.
So practically speaking, should I write something up and bring it to discuss? Do we do it in the meeting? Do we table and discuss it, or any of those options are viable?
Any of the above is great. Any advanced preparation, if you know you're not going to side with what's in the staff report, make notes as to specific points as to why you don't agree. Whether it's a piece of code that you read differently than maybe staff reads, or as you review the evidence, what was submitted by the developer, for example, as you're reviewing that and you say, hey, I noticed the lot's too narrow. It actually doesn't meet the standard. Maybe staff didn't catch it. You say, hey, my finding, here's a fact. It's too narrow based on what was submitted to me by the developer. So that's the evidence. That's the finding. And the conclusion is that you cannot approve this because it's too narrow. It doesn't meet the standard. So as long as we can get that written and into the record, then that is part of the decision that ultimately is made. So you don't have to just take what's in the staff report as, the absolute truth. And we as staffers make errors. We overlook things. You may read something that I haven't read or read it differently, as was the case with our conditional use permit. The language could have been read a couple of different ways. I read it one way, planning commission read it another way. But where we erred in our decision was we didn't make it very clear about how that language was read and understood, the conclusion of what that meant to the planning commission, and had that entered into the record. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
So Scott,
Yeah.
how about if there's a split? Some of us yay for staff, some of us nay. The nayers have to write up a report.
Let's say that there's a motion to deny. Somebody motions to deny and they need to be specific as to why. And then we take a vote. And if that motion carries with a majority, then that's the motion that passes. And the findings associated with that motion are what are part of the decision that is made.
Okay.
So, yeah, if the motion fails, let's say that a planning commissioner makes a motion to deny based on a fact or a finding, but the rest of the commission don't agree with that finding, and that evidence that they're basing their finding on, then somebody else can go ahead and make a substitute motion after the initial motion fails. The substitute motion could be made to say, look, I read it differently. Here's my evidence. Here's my finding. And I move to approve based on the fact that it does comply, XYZ, and then it can move forward. But best practice, if we're at all in a position where it's not a slam dunk, it's, there's some ambiguity as to our understanding of the language, or there's some misinterpretation about a fact and whether or not it complies with code, the best course of action is just to table it and say, look, we'll have staff go back and look at this again. There's some concern about maybe some clarity in the language, or some evidence that was submitted by a developer may be confusing or maybe incomplete. And it's hard for us to make that decision to verify that it meets code. So we'll just push
So we'll
pause,
table it.
table it. We'll come back to it. We'll give staff a minute to look at it again based on your review and your findings. And we can craft additional language to address that in the meantime. Bring it back to the planning commission. Hey, okay, here's now what we've drafted as our facts and findings. If the planning commission agrees with that new written language, then you can move to adopt that fact and finding and then move forward.
Scott, a question on that. Is it a substitute motion or is it an amendment to the motion?
So
There we go.
totally new motion.
Yeah.
So going back to that example that we just made, let's say one commissioner says, I move to deny based on their facts and their findings. But the rest of the commission said, no, I didn't read it that way. I don't believe that's to be the case. What you would have to do is you'd have to take a vote on the motion that was, if it is seconded. Okay, so at least two planning commissioners have to agree to that motion. So one person puts forward a motion. Another individual would then say, I second that motion, because they are on the same wavelength. They have the same thoughts as the other planning commissioner. So let's say that there's a motion and a second, you call a vote and it fails. It doesn't pass.
What if it passes, but someone has an additional?
No,
thing?
Then you just vote against that motion.
but also if somebody makes a motion and there's not a second, it's just like it never happened.
Correct.
Right.
I'm just thinking, because I think for something that just currently happened, I think a lot of people felt like there was an we thought there was an understanding, but one other commissioner thought of something in addition, but the majority was like, yes. Can that person who maybe agreed then say, I motion to add this on to the details?
You,
Is that-
you can have additional dialogue. So
Okay.
if a motion is placed and it is seconded, then the chairperson can call for discussion on the motion. And that's where someone can say, hey, did you think about this? Or did you consider that? And that allows for the original person who placed the motion to go back and amend their motion to say, oh, that's a good idea. I want to add that in.
Well, that's maybe what,
Well, anyway, but
yeah.
It would be an amended motion, which then has to be seconded by somebody else. And as long as that motion as amended is seconded, then you can call a vote. If it passes, it passes. If it fails, then you go back and discuss some more and make a new motion.
So why wouldn't you do that before the motion was even made?
no,
You can.
yeah, but a lot of times you get the motion in the second and then you have the discussion. That's really
Yeah.
a common way to do it. You know
Okay,
what I'm saying?
You can discuss, you can ask staff questions, ask, the applicant questions, and you get to a point where somebody says, I think I know what I want to do. I'm going to make a motion. They just make the motion. Somebody's on the same thought process. They second the motion, but then you can call for
Somebody else is-
discussion. Okay, would anybody like to discuss the motion on the table? And that's where maybe a planning commissioner who may not agree or thinks that maybe they forgot to add something into that motion can bring that up, and the original individual who made the motion can amend if they agree and want to add that in, or you can say, no, that's not part of my motion. I don't want to add
okay,
that.
we'll just vote on the first motion.
But the person who makes the amendment, the second also has to agree. with the
Correct.
Yes, yes.
amendment. So.
Whoever seconds has to agree with what they're seconding.
Correct.
well,
Each time,
but
each
if there's an-
time.
if they
If
make
there's
an
Yeah.
amendment
As
to the
amended.
Right,
second,
they
has
have to
also
agree with that
the
amendment. Yes.
If you want to do some really boring research on YouTube, just go and do some YouTube search for parliamentary procedure. That's what this is
Thank
called.
you. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Who is our parliamentarian?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I mean, typically you have an attorney
No,
who sits in on some of these meetings. to
I
keep
think
us
all of our
in line.
brains are frozen
Then
anyway.
you amend the motion, then you have to go back.
Yeah.
Discuss it.
Okay.
Sorry.
So something to keep in mind, one thing that we kind of got tripped up on in the past is interpretation of language in our code.
Right.
If our code isn't very clear, we need to interpret that as part of the motion. or as part of the record, so an appeal authority knows what we were thinking when we made our decision.
Okay, right.
So this again is from the manual, page 40, if you want to go read through it, but it says, how do we interpret what the language means? So interpretation of the relevant statutes and ordinances is needed to determine if an action is illegal. According to guidelines set forth in court opinions, a code or statute is to be interpreted. So there's a couple of steps here. Our primary goal is to evidence the true intent and purpose of the legislature that basically put that language together in the first place. We're just trying to understand the true intent of whatever legislative body adopted that language in the past, right? So the best evidence of the legislature's intent is the plain language of the statute itself. So we try to read it in its most plain basic form, and we're not supposed to, go off into the weeds thinking, well, what if they meant this or what if they meant that? We're supposed to stick with the plain language as much as we possibly can. So number 3, we presume that the legislature was deliberate in its choice of words and used each term advisedly and in accordance with its ordinary meaning. So they knew what they adopted, they read it, we assume that they drafted it in its plain language form, and that's how it ended up in the code, right? So number 4, where a statute's language is unambiguous and provides a workable result, we need not resort to other interpretive tools and our analysis ends. If it's clear, it's concise, we don't need to go off into the weeds and trying to make it mean something that it plainly doesn't. Okay. Number 5, however, our plain language analysis is not so limited that we only inquire into individual words and subsections in isolation. So we can't cherry pick. We need to look at the code as a whole, draw conclusions from, the intent based on evidence around certain statutes. We can't just take one sentence out of context and say, oh, it means this, when there's descriptive sentences before and after that may clarify. Number 6, our interpretation of a statute requires that each part or section be construed in connection with every other part or section so as to produce a harmonious whole. Kind of the same thing, we're looking at the statute as a whole, not just cherry picking. Number 7, when interpreting statutory text, we presume that the expression of one term should be interpreted as the exclusion of another. So if we have one term, we're not going to substitute it with, something that's not there. So we're not reading between the lines, so to speak. Number 8, we will not infer substantive terms into the text that are not already there. So we're not trying to infer anything. Number 9, we assume absent a contrary indication that the legislature used each term advisedly. So they knew what they were reading. Number 10, we seek to give effect to omissions in statutory language by presuming all omissions to be purposeful. So if it's not there, it's probably on purpose that it's not there.
Mhm.
Okay. So if we're reading through the code and we find something that's not clear, we can use these 10 steps to work our way through interpretation. And what we need to do a better job of, and I need to do a better job of helping you guys, is pointing out maybe where there's some language that may be ambiguous and say, okay, we need to read this language and determine what it means and go through these steps to interpret, so that if there's confusion, we make sure that we go through this interpretation of that language, make sure that our findings of that interpretation are on the record. For example, we need to, a definition or a term, we need to make sure we read it as this. This is how we understood the term, and make sure that that's in the record. So if it's ever challenged by, an appeal, the appeal authority can see, oh, the planning commission read it this way and they interpreted it this way. This is going to be a hard one for us because we may all just read it, say, oh yeah, no, it doesn't seem ambiguous to us, and we don't really need to interpret anything. But then when it gets down to strict scrutiny by an appeal authority, and we haven't provided a detailed interpretation of a term, or this one's going to be tough if it's appealed. But we'll try to do a better job. With our last case, for example, I recognize that there was some ambiguous terms, and I actually mentioned that in the staff report, that this language isn't super clear. And that would be an indication to me to perhaps go through this interpretation exercise with myself and also with the planning commission before we make a decision, if we identify it ahead of time.
Can I have a quick? I think one thing I've learned in this short time is that when there are square footage or measurements involved,
Mhm.
that as a commission, that we need to know what those exact measurements are. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to look at a picture and say, oh, this looks bigger than this, or this looks bigger than that. You understand what I'm saying? And it's the same thing with this subdivision that's coming up. We need to make sure that the width of all those lots is what it says it is and not just what we're told. Do you understand what I mean? I just think sometimes when it has a certain measurement, we need to make sure that we see
A
that
standard,
measurement.
That's it.
right?
Mhm.
So, and that's on the applicant to provide us with that evidence.
And we need to make
We
sure we
have
have
had-
that, or we need to say, okay, we're gonna table this until we have.
Right.
We've had
And that will
unclear
happen
evidence
when
in the
we get
past.
their plan back again, right?
Right.
That's what I'm saying, but I think
Mhm.
but I think it was on this one today too. I think we need to make sure that we're confident that the measurements we're told or the size we're told is exactly what it is.
As part of our review. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's interpretation. Let's jump in here just real quick to some best practices going forward. Okay. So remember, administrative land use decisions are legal and enforceable when supported by substantial evidence. And substantial evidence requires written findings and conclusions. Okay. So that's kind of the crux of all of this: substantial evidence, findings and conclusions. Okay. Interpretation of language. If any code language appears to be ambiguous, confusing, or contradictory, take a moment to discuss the plain meaning of the language, determine the commission's interpretation, and ensure that interpretation is recorded into the record. Okay. Next, from best practices going forward as part of our staff reports, typically, a planning commission analyzes a project and uses the staff report to determine those facts and those findings. And if you agree with those facts and those findings, then we're all okay. Because if we're both on the same page, then the planning commission can simply adopt the findings, conclusions, and any conditions contained within a staff report as part of their motion to either approve or deny the application. So Commissioner Payne did just that in his motion earlier, adopt the staff report. The staff report has that evidence, those facts, those findings, and those conclusions. So that's made a part of the record through the motion.
Is it best practice to always include the staff report
Yeah.
moving forward in our?
If you agree. Yep.
Yeah.
And then we'll get
Because
into
we haven't
that.
always done that. So that's what I'm wondering. Is that kind of a
Best practice.
invitation at this point that that's a good?
Go ahead and do
And-
that going
and-
forward.
Okay, I just
But you could say incorporate the staff report, with the
minus.
exception of.
Yeah.
Or you do say incorporate the staff report along with the required
With the
issues
facts,
that they
findings, and
suggest.
conclusions of the staff
Yes.
report. Yeah. And further below, the planning commission may also move to add or subtract facts, findings, and conclusions to or from those provided in a staff report.
Okay.
So these additions or subtractions need to be clearly included in a motion to approve or deny. And these additions and or subtractions are then incorporated into the notice of decision. So we'll talk more about the notice of decision here in a second. But if the land use authority disagrees with the facts, findings, or conclusions listed in the staff report, then the best practice would be to hold the hearing. We don't have to just not hold the meeting. So let's hold the meeting. Let's discuss the item as a commission, have our public hearing if it necessitates a public hearing. And then discuss where you may differ in your findings and your conclusions and the facts that you've identified. And then as we move forward, let's table or forward that discussion to another planning commission meeting, which gives just administratively time for us to recraft language as part of the record based on the sentiments of the planning commission. Okay. You may get to a point where you feel very confident and you're like, nope, this is a simple change. I don't feel like we need to table it. I'll make sure to adopt the staff report. I'm going to make a substitute to the staff report. I'm going to strike your third finding here, and I'm going to inject this finding there. And that's fine if you guys are comfortable doing so. If not, go ahead and table it. We'll put it together from a staff perspective and go forward.
And how many times can it get tabled? And
Yeah, that's where we need to be careful about making sure from a
'Cause we
due
need to
process perspective, we
it
move things
along.
through.
yes,
Correct. And this is why we have training, because you guys will feel more and more confident as you make motions and as you understand where you do and don't add things in
Right.
going forward.
But it's also okay just to like pause in the meeting and take a breath.
Yeah.
And say, hey, let's just think about it. And discuss the things to add and the things to take out, and you can literally write it down and say,
Yeah.
is this what we mean? And then you can hand
And
that.
I think we do that.
We just didn't.
We didn't
Right.
have the,
we differed
Right.
the staff.
and that other one that we're not even talking about, right? So
Correct.
let's move forward.
So at the end of all of this, let's say we make a decision. If, let's say that everybody's on the same page, staff report, you guys agree with the facts and findings, you adopt the staff report in your motion. Then what happens is after the meeting, staff will put together what's called a notice of decision and send that out to the applicant. It's basically a formal letter that says planning commission held a meeting on this date after a public hearing, if it necessitates one. They made the following motion to either approve or deny. We'll literally paste that motion verbatim from the transcript. And then we'll say this motion was based on the staff report, facts and findings, and then we'll just copy, paste those facts and findings or incorporate them as part of that notice of decision, send that out to the applicant. And what's important about a notice of decision is the date on that notice actually starts the clock through which they're allowed to appeal. So our appeal language in our land use ordinance states you have to submit your appeal within 10 days of the decision being made. And that notice of decision and the date on that notice of decision is actually what starts that clock, not necessarily the action taken here in the meeting, but when that decision notice is sent out.
When the applicant gets that notice of decision.
The date on
On
that
that.
decision. If they
So,
don't open their email for 10 days, then that's the problem for them
Okay.
to figure out.
so as soon as the staff has written that down and sent it off, that's when the clock starts ticking.
Yep.
No matter when the applicant decides to,
Working
Okay.
days or all days?
10. I have to look.
10 days.
It is specified in the ordinance. I forget if it's business
That's okay.
days
you don't
or.
have to-
I
Okay,
forget,
we
But
don't
it's
need
10
that.
days.
They'll get it, yeah.
But that's completion of the process, right? That kind of puts a nice bow tie on it and says, okay, we made a motion, the action's been taken, here's your formal letter, and that's
Yeah.
where it sits. Normally, they don't appeal if it is approved, but a member of the public could appeal your decision as well. If you approve something and they don't agree with your analysis and your facts and your findings, they could appeal the decision to the appeal authority
So anybody could appeal.
if they disagree with your decision.
A non-applicant can appeal.
I believe so. Maybe I need to look into that. I'm pretty sure that's the case. If they disagree with a land use, when you're acting as the land use authority, most of the time you guys are acting as a recommending body, but on conditional use permits, that's not the case. So you
Right.
are the land use authority, you are the final decision maker. And if somebody wants to appeal that, I'm pretty sure the member of the public can do so. When you're acting as a land use authority. The only decision that you make as a land use authority is through the conditional use permit. All the other decisions you make on text amendments, subdivision applications, those are recommendations to
Mhm.
the city council. If the city council approves or denies something as a land use authority, then a member of the public could appeal that decision through the appeal authority
Hmm.
within those 10 days. I'm gonna look into that just to verify. I'm almost positive, but that's where you can contest. Okay.
Okay.
That's it. We feel sufficiently trained.
That's excellent,
Yeah.
Scott.
One.
I don't think we're as bad as off as we think we are, though. I think we've
No, I
done
think
pretty
you're
good.
Fine.
No.
I wanted to make sure we had this training this week because we'll likely have additional discussion on that particular item at either our next planning commission or the following, more than likely to be our next, where we
Okay.
come back, add more clarity into the record.
Okay,
Okay.
well, that will be good for Gavin to be able to hear.
Yeah.
I have one more question. So on items where we're providing a recommendation to the town, the city council. I was on a town board before. I got to switch my brain to the city council. The municipal code says that if a planning commissioner doesn't agree with the recommendation, that they can write or send in
Comments as to why.
Yeah, so I don't want to muddy the waters, but that doesn't apply to land use.
So if, for example, you make a recommendation, let's say that it's a text amendment and you don't agree with the action taken by the planning commission, you're a dissenting voter. Yeah, you could write down, the reasons why you disagreed and forward that to the city council so they understand why you dissented in your vote. Yeah. We've had that done in the past. Yep. Which is fine. You guys can do that.
Good. Scott, thank you. We'll move on to item number 5, back quickly.
Yeah, and I'm okay to just not do this if you guys want to wait till the next meeting, if you're just shivering in your boots, but I'm happy to also run you through it.
What do you want to do? Everybody's freezing.
Honestly, so I'm just looking in the folder. I don't think my
Mhm.
desktop synced to the cloud
yeah.
because my file isn't in the folder. I'm just like, where is
Yeah.
That's a sign.
it? It's a
It's-
sign.
I thought there was something.
We'll look at it next time. No, I had the opportunity to go to the National Planning Association Conference. It's where I get my continuing education credits for my AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners certification. And it was in Philadelphia this year. So it was a great opportunity to go see some historic old town colony, basically old town development. Cool architecture, a lot of good things to learn in the planning world. So I wanted to give you a recap and kind of show you some of the things we looked at, but maybe we'll do that next meeting, if you're okay with that.
Can you still remember that whole thing?
Yeah, I wrote down a lot of notes, so we're good.
I think that would be good. I think we need to probably have a motion. Oh, wait. Any other staff business we need to do?
Where's the secret money?
No, I did want to give you a quick update. So at planning or at city council last night, they did adopt the RE5 zoning amendments. So those were supported and passed. Who knows when we'll employ that language, maybe never, but it's in the code. So just wanted to give you guys an update on that moving forward. But no, I don't think I have any business per se.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for this training. This is really helpful. And thank you for sending out the information.
And I'll
In a
make sure
good
that
way.
you guys get credit for this hour we've just chatted on the training. I think some of you are actually done with your 4 hours for the year, which is, you might be close, Heather. You might. closer
Can
than
it
you
carry
think.
over to next year?
Yeah.
Well, I'd barely done that training and Scott's like, you gotta do it this year. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm waiting.
Wait a few more months, right?
Okay.
I just keep forgetting this.
You're fine.
Planning commissioners, have anything else you need to discuss? No. Next meeting, May 4th, correct? Hey, we need a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Second that.
It's been moved and motion, it has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.